Okay, let's jump into one of philosophy's most profound and really poignant scenes, the final hours of Socrates, captured for us in Plato's Phaedo.
It's a truly unique source, isn't it? We're not just getting philosophical arguments. We're like witnessing a mind grappling with the ultimate questions, life and death.
Right, surrounded by friends right before the end.
Exactly.
So our mission today is to take Plato's account of this final conversation and, deep dive into the core arguments Socrates offers on this specific day. Arguments for the immortality of the soul.
Imagine the weight of that moment. A condemned man, execution delayed, finally facing it, and he chooses to spend these last hours discussing the soul's fate.
It's an incredible blend, isn't it? Somber reality and, soaring philosophical hope.
Yeah, what kind of thoughts, what kind of proofs would such a figure offer his closest friends when everything is on the line? That's really the heart of this deep dive for you.
So let's set the scene a bit. The execution had been postponed, what was it, a month? Because of this sacred ship's voyage to Delos.
That's right. A religious observation delayed things. So now the ship is back, and Socrates' friends arrive early at the prison. They know this is it, their last chance to talk.
And Plato tells us who was there. We've got Simmias and Cebes from Thebes, Crito, Apollodorus, Euclid, others maybe less famous today.
Right, and some notable absences, too. Plato himself was ill, apparently, and Aristippus and Cleombrotus weren't there either.
Socrates' wife, Xanthippe, she was there at first with her children, overwhelmed by grief, as you'd expect.
Yeah, the text says Crito's people gently took her home. So when the friends arrive, Socrates has just been released from his chains.
And he's rubbing his leg where the fetters had been. Makes this simple observation, doesn't he? How pleasure seems to follow pain. They're linked somehow.
Almost like they're joined at the hip, or the feet, as he puts it, amusingly. He even muses that Aesop should have written a fable about it, this little moment of kind of wry observation right at the start.
And then Cebes picks up on something else Socrates had been doing in prison, putting Aesop's fables into verse. Which is odd, right? Socrates wasn't known as a poet.
Not at all. And Socrates explains he'd had these recurring dreams. They kept telling him to practice music.
Literal music.
Oh.
Or philosophy.
Well, he wasn't sure. Philosophy was the highest music in his view, but just in case the dream meant actual composing, he decided to try writing some verses before he died. Cover his bases, fulfill the divine command.
Okay. Then he gives this message for another poet, Evenus. He invites him to follow him in death.
Yeah, saying that as a philosopher, Evenus should be willing to die, which sounds stark.
It does,
Yeah.
but he immediately adds a crucial point. Suicide is not permitted.
Right. This leads straight into a core belief of the time. We humans are like possessions of the gods.
Like property.
In a sense. Just as you wouldn't want your property, say your slave, leaving your service without permission, we shouldn't take our own lives from the god's service.
Okay, but that raises an immediate question, doesn't it? If the gods are the best masters, the best possible rulers, as Socrates seems to think.
Then why would a wise man want to leave their service by dying? It seems contradictory.
Exactly.
And Socrates' answer is, well, profound. He's convinced he's not just dying, he's going somewhere to join other good gods and also better men who've already passed on.
So it's not fleeing bad masters. It's anticipating moving into even better company.
Precisely. And that belief, that justification for facing death willingly, that's his jumping off point. It leads right into arguing that the soul must continue to exist somehow.
Okay, so that sets up the core question.
Yeah.
Where does the soul go? And this takes us into the first arguments for the soul's continued existence, starting with an ancient doctrine.
Yes, he mentions this old belief that souls journey between this world and the other world. And crucially, that the living are actually born from the dead.
Born from the dead. How does that work?
Well, if it's true, if souls can come back from that other realm to be born again, then they must exist in that other realm after death in order to come back, see? It implies their continued existence over there.
Got it. If they return, they must have been somewhere to return from.
Exactly. And this idea connects nicely with Plato's really famous doctrine, the doctrine of recollection or anamnesis.
Which isn't just about the soul existing after death, but actually confirms its existence before birth.
Yeah, that's the key part here. The argument for recollection, well, it has a couple of strands. One proof is this idea about asking questions. Socrates references, the kind of thing he did in the Meno.
The geometry example.
Yeah.
With the slave boy.
Right. You take someone who hasn't been formally taught, ask them the right questions about a diagram, guide them, and they can arrive at true geometric conclusions.
It feels like they're learning it on the spot, but the argument is they're actually remembering it, recollecting knowledge the soul already had.
Exactly. The questions aren't putting the knowledge in, they're drawing it out. It was latent.
Okay, what's the other proof?
It's about association. How seeing one thing can trigger the memory of something else.
Like seeing a picture of someone reminds you of the actual person.
Yeah, or seeing a liar might make you think of the person who plays it, the beloved perhaps. Or seeing Simmias, who's right there, might remind you of Cebes. Recollection can be sparked by things that are similar or even things that are dissimilar but associated.
Okay, association makes sense. But the really core part of this recollection argument, maybe the trickiest part, is about abstract ideas, isn't it? Things like perfect equality with a capital E, or absolute beauty, or justice.
Right. We see equal things all the time in the world around us. Two sticks, two stones that seem equal.
But are they ever perfectly equal?
Exactly. Let's be honest. No two physical things are absolutely perfectly identical in every single respect, unchangingly. They always fall short of some ideal standard.
And the very fact that we can look at two sticks and say, they're almost equal, but this one's a tiny bit longer. Or they fall short of perfect equality. That implies we must already have a concept, an idea in our minds of what perfect equality is.
Precisely. We're using that perfect standard to judge the imperfect examples we see through our senses.
But where did we get that perfect standard? We never actually see perfect equality in the physical world.
That's the nub of it. Since our senses only ever show us imperfect examples, our soul must have known these perfect ideas, these forms, equality, beauty, goodness, before it was united with the body and started using the senses.
So the conclusion is, we couldn't recognize imperfection if we didn't already grasp perfection. We grasp perfection through these forms. We couldn't have learned the forms through earthly experience. Therefore, our soul must have known them before we were born.
Right. It proves the soul's pre-existence. And it strongly suggests the soul is distinct from the body and its senses, and that it's connected to this higher realm of perfect forms.
Okay, so pre-existence is established, or at least argued for, but, like you said, Socrates' friends will point out, that doesn't automatically prove the soul survives after death.
Exactly. Which leads Socrates to think about the soul's actual nature. What kind of thing is it? Is it the sort of thing that can just dissolve or fall apart when the body dies?
Right. What's it made of, philosophically speaking?
So Socrates draws this contrast between two kinds of reality, you could say. On one hand, you have things that are simple, unchanging, invisible, like the forms themselves, or perhaps the soul when it's engaged in pure thought.
And on the other hand?
On the other hand, you have things that are composite, always changing, visible, the things we perceive with our senses, like our own bodies.
And the argument is, the simple, invisible stuff is less likely to break apart.
Exactly. Things that are simple, uniform, and invisible are inherently more stable, less liable to dissolution than things that are made of parts, constantly changing and visible.
So the soul's more like the forms, and the body is like, well, the body.
Precisely. He says the soul is akin to the divine, the unchanging, the intelligible. The body is akin to the mortal, the changing, the visible. The soul commands, the body serves.
That puts the soul in a much more durable category.
He goes so far as to say the soul is altogether indissoluble, or nearly so, because it shares characteristics with the divine and the immortal, while the body is obviously mortal and prone to quick decay.
He even makes that interesting point about embalming, doesn't he?
Yeah. People go to great lengths to preserve the physical body, and mummies can last for ages. If even the mortal body can be preserved like that, how much more likely is it that the soul, especially a soul that has practiced detaching itself from the body's concerns during life, would resist dissolution?
This idea that how you live affects the soul's state after death naturally leads into what Socrates says next, about the different fates awaiting different kinds of souls.
Right. If a soul has spent its life indulging bodily desires, clinging to the physical, it becomes heavy, polluted, weighed down. It can't easily depart to the pure, invisible realm.
The text even says such souls might linger, becoming visible as ghostly apparitions, because they're still attached to the visible world.
Yeah, that's the image Plato uses. And their fate in the cycle of rebirth reflects their character. Maybe they enter an animal suited to their vice, like a donkey for a glutton or a wolf for a predator.
What about people who were, just normally decent? Not philosophers, but good citizens.
They fare better. Those who practiced ordinary virtues, justice, moderation, but without the deeper understanding of philosophy, they might get a relatively peaceful rebirth, perhaps as social creatures like bees or ants, or even back into human form as respectable people.
But the highest destiny, that's reserved for the philosopher.
Absolutely. Only the soul that has been purified through philosophy, that has practiced detaching from the body and contemplating the forms, is considered ready to depart purely and join the company of the gods, to achieve the best possible state.
And this explains why the philosopher avoids bodily pleasures. It's not like conventional virtue motivated by fear or trading pleasures.
No, it's not about fearing disgrace or wanting some other reward. It's because the philosopher understands that these intense physical pleasures and pains are like nails, Socrates says. They fasten the soul to the body.
Nailing it down.
Yeah, saturating it with the corporeal, making it believe that only physical things are real, blinding it to the higher reality of the forms. Only when the soul is calm, free from these bodily distractions, can it truly perceive truth.
So philosophy isn't just abstract thought. It's an active process of purification, preparing the soul.
Exactly, freeing it for its journey.
Now, after hearing all this, the soul pre-exists. It's divine-like. It should be purified. Simmias and Cebes, they still have doubts, especially about the imperishability part.
Yeah, and they're understandably hesitant. It's Socrates' last day. You don't want to argue.
But Socrates encourages them. He compares himself to a swan, singing more beautifully before death, because it anticipates joining its god, Apollo. He's not sad. He's looking forward to something. So he wants the objections.
Right. So Simmias goes first. He admits it's really hard, maybe impossible, to attain true certainty about these things in this life.
Kind of a pragmatic point.
Very. He suggests that if you can't get a divine revelation or certain proof, the best you can do is find the strongest human argument, the best raft, as he calls it, and sail through life on that, knowing it's still a bit risky.
Acknowledging the uncertainty. So what's his specific worry, his alternative raft?
His objection is clever. He suggests the soul, even though it's invisible and seems divine, might be like a harmony.
A harmony, like in music.
Exactly, like the attunement of a lyre. A harmony is beautiful, it's invisible, non-physical, you could even say divine-like in its effect. But it completely depends on the physical lyre.
Ah, I see where he's going. If you break the lyre.
The harmony vanishes instantly. Even though the harmony itself wasn't physical, its existence was entirely dependent on the physical structure. So Simmias asks, couldn't the soul be just that? A complex harmony or balance of the body's physical elements? Hot, cold, wet, dry?
Oh, the body breaks down at death.
The harmony, the soul, simply ceases to exist. Poof, gone, even though it was invisible.
That's a powerful analogy, especially given Socrates just mentioned music.
Yeah.
Okay, what about Cebes?
Cebes raises a different, maybe even trickier objection. He says, okay, I can grant the soul is way more durable than the body, and I accept the recollection argument, so the soul probably existed before birth.
So he accepts pre-existence and durability. What's the but?
The but is that still doesn't prove it's immortal, undying. He uses this great analogy of a weaver and his coats.
A weaver, tell me more.
A weaver lives a long life. He makes many coats. He wears them out, makes new ones. Clearly, the weaver outlasts many, many coats. He's more durable than any single coat.
Okay, makes sense.
But eventually the weaver himself dies, and maybe the very last coat he wove actually outlasts him for a little while.
Ah, so the soul could be like the weaver.
Exactly. Cebes argues the soul might go through many bodies, wear them out, proving it's longer lasting than any one body, just like the weaver outlasts his coats. But who's to say the soul itself doesn't eventually wear out and perish in its final death? Maybe its last coat, its last body, even outlasts it slightly. We wouldn't know.
So he needs proof the soul is absolutely imperishable, not just very long-lived.
Precisely. He wants certainty that it doesn't have a finite lifespan, however long.
Wow, those are serious challenges. Simmias harmony and Cebes weaver. How does Socrates react? Does he get defensive?
Not at all, but he does give a warning first against becoming a mythologist.
A what? Mythologist.
Yeah, a hater of arguments, of logos. He says it's like becoming a misanthrope, a hater of people. You meet a few bad people, get betrayed, and then decide all people are awful.
So you hear a few arguments that sound good but turn out flawed.
And you decide all arguments are useless, untrustworthy. He says that's a mistake. The fault isn't in argument itself, but usually in our own lack of skill in using or judging arguments.
Don't blame the tool, blame the user.
Pretty much. And he says his goal now is to really test these arguments rigorously. First to convince himself, and only secondarily to convince them. He takes the objections seriously.
Okay, so how does he tackle Simmias's harmony argument first? that the soul is just an attunement of the body.
He offers several counter-arguments. First, he links back to recollection. Remember, they had previously agreed, or at least Socrates had argued convincingly, that learning is recollection.
Right, implying the soul existed before the body, with knowledge.
Exactly. But a harmony, like the attunement of a lyre, typically comes into being when the physical parts are assembled and tuned. It doesn't pre-exist the instrument.
So recollection implies pre-existence, but the harmony idea implies the soul depends on the body's formation. They contradict each other.
Right. You can't really hold both views consistently, he suggests. If you accept recollection, you have to reject the harmony analogy.
Okay, good point. What else?
Second, he points out that the soul often seems to be in conflict with the body. It directs, commands, and even opposes bodily desires and feelings.
Like telling yourself not to eat that extra piece of cake.
Or, as he quotes from Homer, Odysseus striking his chest and telling his heart to endure suffering. Can a harmony command the very elements that create it? Can the music tell the lyre strings what to do?
No, the harmony just is what the strings are doing. It follows, it doesn't lead.
Precisely. The soul shows agency, leadership, opposition to the body. A harmony is entirely dependent on and follows its physical basis. So the soul can't just be a harmony.
That seems quite compelling. The soul acts on the body, not just from it. Is there a third point against harmony?
Yes. He talks about virtue and vice. Souls can be good or bad, wise or foolish, virtuous or vicious. There are degrees, but can a harmony itself have degrees in that way? Strictly speaking, something either is a harmony perfectly tuned or it isn't. Maybe one harmony is more complex than another, but harmony itself doesn't admit of degrees of being more or less harmony. And you definitely can't say one harmony is virtuous and another vicious in the way a soul can be.
So if all souls were harmonies, they should all be equally soulful, equally perfect harmonies if the body is healthy. But we clearly see differences in character and wisdom.
Exactly. The analogy breaks down when you consider the moral dimension and the varying states of souls.
Okay, so the harmony argument seems pretty well dismantled. How does he then move towards proving the absolute imperishability that Cebes was asking for? This is the big one.
This is where Socrates shares a bit about his own intellectual journey. It's fascinating. He talks about how he was initially really excited by earlier philosophers, especially Anaxagoras.
Why Anaxagoras?
Because Anaxagoras talked about nous, or mind, as the ultimate cause that arranged everything in the universe. Socrates thought, great, if mind arranges things, it must arrange them for the best. He expected explanations based on purpose and value.
But that's not what he found.
No, he was deeply disappointed. Because Anaxagoras and others, after mentioning mind, just went back to explaining things using purely physical causes, air, ether, water, vortexes, that kind of thing.
They didn't actually explain the why, the purpose.
Exactly. They didn't explain why it's best for the Earth to be round or in the center or anything like that. They just gave mechanical explanations.
He gives that famous example about himself sitting in prison, doesn't he?
Yes. It's brilliant. He says a purely physical explanation would talk about his bones, muscles, tendons, how they bend and flex to allow him to sit.
Those are the conditions that make sitting possible.
Right. But they aren't the true cause of why he's sitting there in prison awaiting execution. The true cause is that the Athenians condemned him, and he chose to remain, believing it was the right and just thing to do, rather than escape.
So confusing the necessary conditions, bones, muscles, with the true cause, his choice, the judgment, is a major philosophical error.
Absolutely. And because he found this physicalist approach so unsatisfying for finding true causes, he developed what he calls his second best method, or his second sailing.
What does that involve?
Turning away from direct observation of physical things, which can be confusing, and instead focusing on logoi, on reasoning, concepts, definitions, ideas, or forms. He starts by hypothesizing something he believes is true, like the existence of the forms, and then examines what follows logically from that hypothesis.
Okay, so reason and concepts become the primary tools, taking the forms as a starting point. How does this method lead to the final proof of imperishability?
Right, this is the culmination. He brings back the doctrine of forms or ideas. Remember who we discussed that the ideas themselves, like absolute largeness, absolute smallness, absolute heat, absolute cold, are distinct and mutually exclusive? Largeness itself can never be smallness.
Yeah, okay, the abstract concepts themselves are pure and don't contain their opposite.
Got it. Now, he extends this. It's not just the form itself that excludes its opposite. Things that necessarily participate in or bring along a certain form also cannot admit the opposite of that form while remaining what they are.
Okay, break that down. Things that bring along a form.
Let's use his examples. Fire. Fire isn't the form of heat itself, but wherever there is fire, it brings heat with it. Its essential nature involves heat.
Right. Fire is inherently hot.
And the form of heat excludes its opposite, the form of cold. Therefore, fire, because it essentially brings heat, must also exclude cold. Coldness cannot approach fire without the fire either withdrawing or being destroyed. Fire cannot become cold and still be fire.
Okay, I think I follow. Same with snow. Snow brings coldness. Coldness excludes heat, so snow excludes heat.
Exactly. Or numbers. The number 3. 3 isn't the form of oddness itself, but it is essentially an odd number. It brings oddness with it.
And oddness excludes evenness.
So the number 3 must exclude evenness. If the principle of evenness were to approach 3, 3 wouldn't become even. It would have to cease to be. 3 either withdraw or perish, conceptually speaking.
Got it. The essential characteristic repels its opposite. So how does this apply to the soul?
What is the essential characteristic that the soul always brings with it wherever it is found in a body? Exactly. The soul is that which makes a body alive. It brings life.
And life is the opposite of death.
Right. The form of life excludes the form of death. Therefore, the soul, because its very essence is to bring life, must also exclude death.
So death cannot approach the soul.
Death cannot be admitted by the soul, just as evenness cannot be admitted by 3 or coldness by fire. That which cannot admit death, Socrates says, is deathless or immortal. Athanaton.
The soul is immortal because its nature is fundamentally incompatible with death.
Yes. And then he takes the crucial step Cebes needed. He argues that if something is immortal, deathless, it must also be imperishable. Olathron. Just like the uncold fire doesn't perish when cold approaches but withdraws, and the uneven doesn't perish when even approaches but withdraws.
The undying soul doesn't perish when death approaches the body, but must withdraw safe and sound.
That's the core of the final argument. The soul's essential function is to bring life. Life excludes death. Therefore, the soul excludes death. And that which excludes death cannot be destroyed by death's approach. It must be imperishable. It survives the death of the body.
Wow. Okay, that's intricate, but it follows the logic he set up with fire and numbers. It directly addresses Cebes' need for proof of imperishability, not just longevity.
It does. It's a purely conceptual argument based on the nature of the soul and its relationship to life and death, grounded in his theory of forms.
Now, after reaching this philosophical peak, Socrates changes tone quite dramatically, doesn't he? He moves from logical proof to, well, a story.
Yeah, he says something like, okay, we've done the hard work of argument, now let me tell you a charming tale. He explicitly states he's not insisting on the literal truth of every detail, but that something of the kind is true, and believing it is a noble risk or a glorious venture.
This is where he gets into the geography of the afterlife.
Right. His cosmology. He pictures the earth as round, held in the center of the heavens by balance. But we humans don't live on the true surface.
We don't. Where do we live?
We live down in hollows, valleys filled with thick air, mist, and water. Like ants or frogs living around a marsh, we think our little hollow is the whole world.
So there's a true Earth somewhere else.
Yes, above us, in the pure ether, the upper heavens. This true earth is radiant, beautiful, with much brighter colors like jewels. Perfect plants, amazing gems instead of ordinary stones, no disease, longer lifespans, keener senses.
And the inhabitants there get to hang out with the gods.
Apparently so. They have direct converse with the gods. It's an idealized realm.
And what about below us? Below these hollows?
Beneath the Earth's crust, there are vast subterranean regions, interconnected caverns and rivers, all flowing towards and away from a huge central chasm called Tartarus.
Tartarus, like the abyss.
Pretty much. He describes this incredible perpetual motion like the earth breathing. Huge volumes of water, air, fire, even mud surge into and out of Tartarus, flowing through underground rivers, but never going below the absolute center of the earth.
It sounds very dynamic. Does he name these rivers?
He names 4 main ones. Oceanus, which encircles the earth. Acheron, which flows to the Acherusian lake. That's where most ordinary souls go after death to await judgment and rebirth.
Okay. Acheron for the average souls. What else?
Pyriphlegethon, a river of fire which flows into Tartarus and is linked to volcanoes on our surface. And Cocytus, the river of wailing, also called the Stygian River, which gains strange powers from Lake Styx before it too plunges into Tartarus.
So this whole complex geography serves to illustrate the different paths souls might take after death, depending on their lives.
Exactly. It provides a kind of imaginative landscape for the consequences of virtue and vice, reinforcing the importance of how one lives. Even if it's a myth, it serves the philosophical purpose.
Which brings the whole conversation right back around, doesn't it? Given this possibility, the soul's immortality, these potential afterlife journeys, how should you live now?
Right. Socrates is absolutely clear. The most important thing is the care of the soul through cultivating virtue and wisdom.
He emphasizes that the true philosopher actively rejects, or at least minimizes, bodily pleasures, desires, material possessions, fine clothes, all that stuff.
Because these things, while tempting, are seen as fundamentally harmful to the soul. They distract it, pollute it, nail it to the physical, making it heavy and unable to ascend easily after death.
Instead of external adornments, the philosopher should focus on adorning the soul itself, with its proper jewels:
Which are?
temperance, justice, courage, nobility, and truth. These are the qualities that truly beautify and purify the soul.
And he makes that really sharp contrast again with conventional virtue. Most people might act bravely or moderately, but why?
Usually out of fear of something worse, right?
Yep.
Or to gain some other pleasure, like being brave in battle because you fear disgrace more than death.
Or being temperate about food just so you can indulge more and drink later. Socrates sees this as just trading one fear or pleasure for another. It's a shadow play, he says, a slavish kind of virtue, not genuine goodness.
Because it's not based on wisdom, on understanding what's truly good for the soul.
Exactly. True virtue, the kind that purifies, only comes through philosophy, through wisdom. He uses that analogy from the mysteries. Many carry the thyrsus, the ritual staff, but few are the true mystics.
Meaning,
Many people go through the outward motions of religion or conventional morality, but only a few, the true philosophers, undergo the inner purification, the initiation into wisdom that makes them fit to join the gods. The uninitiated, he says, wallow in the mud.
so living philosophically, constantly trying to free the soul from the body's distractions and focus on truth and virtue. That is the practice of dying he talked about earlier.
Yes, it's a lifelong preparation. And if you've spent your life practicing this separation, then actual death isn't something to be feared. It's the culmination, the release, the chance to finally pursue wisdom purely, without the body getting in the way.
As this long conversation winds down, the practicalities of the execution start to intrude. The jailer comes in.
Right, the time is near. And Crito, ever the loyal friend, asks Socrates about practical matters. Funeral arrangements, burial.
And Socrates' response is quite striking, isn't it?
Hmm.
Almost dismissive, but in a profound way.
Very. He basically tells Crito, you can bury me however you like if you can catch me. He emphasizes that Crito will be burying his body, not him, not Socrates.
He jokes that he was Crito's surety that he wouldn't run away before the trial, but now Crito needs to be surety to the others that Socrates has run away to the afterlife.
Yeah, it's a light touch on a heavy subject. Then there's the practical matter of washing the bodies. Socrates says he'll do it himself beforehand so the women don't have the trouble after he's gone.
And then, his very last words, after he's drunk the hemlock, as the numbness spreads, what does he say?
Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius. Pay it and don't forget.
A cock. To Asclepius, the god of healing. What does that mean?
It's famously ambiguous. Maybe he sees death as a cure, a healing from the sickness of being confined in a body. Or maybe it was just a literal small religious debt he remembered at the last moment. We don't really know for sure. It's a final, slightly mysterious instruction.
Throughout this whole final scene, Plato emphasizes Socrates' calmness, his cheerfulness, his lack of fear.
Absolutely. His composure in the face of death is perhaps as persuasive as any of his logical arguments. His life and his death seem to embody the philosophy he taught.
So wrapping up this deep dive into the Phaedo, we've really journeyed through quite a landscape, from the prison setting and those initial thoughts.
Through the arguments for pre-existence via recollection, the soul's divine and simple nature.
Tackling those tough objections from Simmias about harmony and Cebes about the weaver.
Then digging into Socrates' own philosophical method, his second sailing.
Unpacking that final, complex proof for imperishability based on the soul bringing life and excluding death.
Visiting that mythological afterlife, the true earth and the rivers below.
And finally landing on that powerful call to live a philosophical life, a life of purification, focused on virtue and truth as the best preparation for whatever comes next.
It's dense stuff, definitely rooted in Plato's specific philosophical system and the ancient Greek context. The arguments need careful thought.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the core question Socrates is wrestling with here, They don't really go away, do they? What is consciousness, the soul, the mind? Is it just the body or something more? Does anything survive death?
And crucially, how does thinking about these possibilities affect how you live now? What should you prioritize? What constitutes a good life, a prepared soul?
Even if you, listening now, find the specific arguments from 2,400 years ago maybe unconvincing or the mythology a bit fanciful, the underlying questions of who we are, our relationship to our bodies, the pursuit of truth, the meaning of virtue, and how we face our own mortality, these are still incredibly relevant for you.
Socrates was convinced that the philosopher's life is a practice of dying, a conscious preparation for the soul's separation. What might it mean, perhaps, for you to practice living in a way that clarifies your values, purifies your focus, and prepares your inner self, regardless of whether you believe in an afterlife or remain uncertain about what comes next?